A woman is led down stone steps into a small underground chamber carrying a loaf of bread, a jug of water, and a lamp with just enough oil to burn for a few hours. Then the heavy door is sealed from above, and Rome walks away. This is the punishment of entombment, reserved for the Vestal Virgins who broke their vow of chastity, and it tells us something essential about how Rome understood the relationship between a woman's body, the state's survival, and the sacred contract that bound them together. For over 1,000 years, from the earliest days of the Republic through the late Empire, 6 women maintained the eternal flame in the Temple of Vesta, their virginity believed to shield Rome itself from catastrophe. When that shield cracked, the response was not ordinary execution, but a ritual that transformed punishment into religious necessity, the condemned into a kind of living sacrifice, buried not in secret, but with the full ceremony of state. The Vestals occupied a unique position in Roman society, women with power, property rights, and public authority in a world that granted women almost none of these. Chosen between ages 6 and 10 from patrician families, they served 30 years. 10 learning, 10 performing duties, 10 teaching. They could own land, make wills, free slaves, and their testimony in court required no male guardian. Their persons were sacrosanct. To harm a Vestal carried the death penalty. They walked the streets preceded by a lictor, the same attendant who cleared the path for magistrates. At public games, they sat in reserved seats of honor. This was power, conditional, constrained by a single immovable rule, but power nonetheless. The price was absolute chastity. Break it, and the city's fortune would collapse with you. When suspicion fell on a Vestal, the machinery of investigation moved with a strange combination of urgency and dread. The Pontifex Maximus, Rome's chief priest, led the inquiry, not a secular magistrate but a religious authority, because the crime was not merely personal but cosmic. The accused was suspended from her duties, forbidden to touch the sacred fire or perform rituals. A trial followed, but not in a public court. The College of Pontiffs convened in private, weighing testimony, examining evidence, lovers named, secret meetings reconstructed, sometimes torture applied to slaves who might confirm or deny. The stakes were staggering. If guilty, both she and her lover would die, but in different languages of death. He would be beaten to death publicly in the Forum, his body a spectacle of ordinary punishment. She would be buried alive, her death hidden, sealed, transformed from execution into something that resembled sacrifice. The procession through Rome was theater written in silence. The convicted Vestal was placed in a covered litter so tight she could not stand, carried through streets that fell quiet as she passed. Crowds gathered but did not speak. To wail or mourn was forbidden, treated as an insult to the ritual's solemnity. The litter moved toward the Campus Sceleratus, the evil field, a barren patch of ground just inside the city walls near the Colline Gate. Here, workers had already dug a small underground chamber, stone-lined, barely large enough for a person to recline. A ladder descended into darkness. At the threshold, the Pontifex Maximus performed the final rite. Prayers to the gods asking that if the woman was innocent, they might spare Rome from the consequences of her death. The language acknowledged doubt, but the ritual proceeded anyway. She climbed down. The bread and water were gestures, not provisions. No one expected them to sustain life, but their presence meant Rome had not technically executed her by starvation. The distinction was legal, theological, a fiction that preserved the boundary between punishment and murder. The lamp oil would last perhaps a few hours, no more. Then workers lowered the heavy stone slab, sealed the opening, and covered it with earth. The ground was leveled, unmarked. Within hours, the city resumed its noise, its commerce, its ordinary crimes and ordinary punishments. But below the surface, a woman sat in absolute darkness, breath by breath, until the air thinned and the body surrendered. How long that took? A day? 2 days? No ancient source specifies, perhaps because no one descended afterward to check. The historical record is sparse but consistent. Livy names 8 Vestals executed for unchastity across 5 centuries of the Republic. Plutarch describes the case of 2 Vestals, Aemilia and Licinia, buried alive in 114 BCE during a period of military disasters that Rome interpreted as signs of divine anger. Dio Cassius records that the Emperor Domitian, in 91 CE, buried alive the Vestal Cornelia and had her alleged lovers beaten to death, then later executed more Vestals under suspicion, his cruelty framed as pious restoration of ancient custom. But other sources suggest Domitian fabricated charges for political theater, using religious law as a weapon. The accusations were impossible to definitively prove or disprove. Virginity was not medically verifiable in Roman understanding, and the evidence often came from slaves under torture or rivals with motives to lie. Some modern scholars argue that many accused Vestals were victims of political purges disguised as moral enforcement, their deaths serving not the gods, but the emperor's need to project control. Yet even accounting for false accusations, the ritual itself reveals something about Roman logic. Burial alive was not rage or sadism, but a theological solution to a theological problem. If a Vestal's body was polluted, Roman law held that no citizen could be the direct agent of her death without incurring the same pollution. So the state built a mechanism that killed without killing, that let the earth do what human hands could not. The bread and water, the lamp, the unsealed chamber, these were gestures toward plausible deniability, a way for Rome to say the gods, not the city, had decided. And because the death was hidden, it avoided the spectacle of other executions. Crucifixions, beheadings, gladiatorial deaths, all were visible, public, meant to be witnessed. But a Vestal's end was buried, erased, because to watch might be to acknowledge that Rome was killing the very figures it had declared inviolable. Contrast this with the punishment for male conspirators or traitors, the Tarpeian Rock, where the condemned were hurled from a cliff in full view of the forum, their bodies left broken at the base. These deaths were loud, material, meant to be remembered. The Vestal's death was silent, immaterial, absorbed into the earth like a seed that would not sprout. The difference was not mercy, but category. She was not a criminal, but a broken vessel, and her punishment had to mimic purification, even as it destroyed. And the paradox cuts deeper. The Vestals were chosen as children, their vows taken before they could understand the stakes, their lives shaped entirely by a duty they did not choose. Roman law recognized that a contract signed under duress or by a minor lacked full consent, but not here. The Vestal's vow was eternal, binding, and any attempt to break it was met not with release, but annihilation. The state demanded her virginity to protect the city, then killed her if she failed to maintain it, and called the killing necessary, sacred, a restoration of balance. She was simultaneously the most honored woman in Rome and the most vulnerable, her body a kind of public property whose integrity mattered more than her will, her survival, her voice. But the punishment extended beyond the woman in the chamber. Her family bore the stain of her conviction, their status compromised, their name whispered in the forum with a mixture of pity and suspicion. Her alleged lover, if identified, faced a public death designed to humiliate, stripped, beaten with rods until the flesh split, then finished with clubs as crowds watched from the market stalls and temple steps. Sometimes the lover was a senator, a military officer, a man of rank whose fall became spectacle in its own right. The contrast was deliberate. His death was visible theater, hers invisible ritual. His body was discarded, hers entombed. He was punished for lust, she for betraying the cosmic order. The law treated them as different categories of criminal, though the act was shared. And there were moments when the ritual faltered, when Rome itself seemed uncertain whether the punishment was justice or atrocity. In 483 BCE, according to Livy, a Vestal named Oppia was convicted and condemned to burial. But as the procession moved through the city, a violent thunderstorm erupted, lightning striking so close to the litter that the bearers dropped it and fled. The Pontifex Maximus halted the ceremony, interpreting the storm as a divine sign. Oppia was returned to the temple, her sentence suspended, her case reopened. She was ultimately acquitted. The story, whether literal or embellished, reveals something essential. Rome believed the gods could intervene, that the ritual was not mechanical but alive, responsive to forces beyond human control. And if the gods could stop a punishment, it meant they watched, judged, and occasionally dissented from the judgments of priests. In another case, around 420 BCE, a Vestal named Postumia was accused based on her appearance and behavior. She dressed too stylishly, spoke too freely, exhibited what the sources call a too lively manner. The College of Pontiffs investigated but found no evidence of actual unchastity. She was acquitted but severely reprimanded, told to adopt a more somber demeanor and avoid any hint of levity. The message was clear. The appearance of purity mattered as much as the fact of it. A Vestal's body language, her clothing, her tone of voice, all were subject to scrutiny, because her role was not just to be chaste, but to perform chastity, to embody it so visibly that no Roman could doubt the city's protection. The punishment for failing that performance, even without breaking the vow, was public humiliation and the ever-present threat that next time the acquittal might not come. The question of motivation haunts these cases. Why did Rome invest so much terror in policing the sexuality of 6 women? The answer lies in the cosmology that underpinned Roman religion. Vesta was the goddess of the hearth, the sacred flame her physical manifestation, and that flame represented the continuity of Rome itself. Extinguish it, and the city would fall. The Vestals were not merely priestesses, but living conduits between the human and divine, their bodies the vessel through which divine favor flowed. If one body was corrupted, the entire channel was compromised, and with it the safety of millions. This was not superstition in the dismissive modern sense, but a coherent theological system in which the physical state of specific bodies carried metaphysical weight. A Vestal's virginity was infrastructure, as essential to Rome's survival as aqueducts or walls. And when infrastructure failed, the response was not repair, but replacement. the faulty component removed, and the system restored. But there was always a gap between theology and politics. Accusations against Vestals spiked during periods of military defeat, plague, or political instability. When the Carthaginians crushed Roman legions at Cannae in 216 BCE, 2 Vestals were accused and executed. When civil war threatened the Republic in the 1st century BCE, more accusations followed. The pattern suggests that Vestals were scapegoats, their deaths a way for Rome to explain catastrophe without confronting failures of leadership, strategy, or social structure. If the city suffered, it was not because generals were incompetent or the Senate corrupt, but because a woman had broken her vow, and the gods had withdrawn their favor. The punishment restored cosmic order and deflected political blame in a single ritual, and yet the Vestals themselves left almost no record of their own voices. We have inscriptions honoring their service, statues commemorating their piety, legal documents outlining their privileges, but no letters, no diaries, no personal testimony of what it meant to live under such scrutiny, to carry the weight of a city's survival on the condition of your celibacy. The silence is not accidental. Roman society structured their existence to erase individuality, to make them symbols rather than people. Even their names, preserved in the historical record, are often accompanied by no other detail, just the name, the accusation, the punishment. They are known by what was done to them, not by what they did, thought, or felt. Modern discomfort with the punishment is easy, almost reflexive. But Rome's discomfort was present too, encoded in the ritual's contradictions. The bread that could not nourish, the burial that was not called execution, the silence that replaced the usual roar of public death. The city wanted the Vestal dead, but could not bear to watch her die, needed her punished, but could not name itself the punisher. So it built a ceremony that split the difference, that turned murder into mystery and called it piety. And for 1,000 years, that ceremony held, not because Romans believed it was just, but because they believed it was necessary, that the alternative, a Rome unprotected by sacred virgins and uncorrected by sacred violence, was worse than the suffocation of a woman underground, lamp oil exhausted, bread uneaten, waiting in darkness for the air to fail. Which disturbs you more, that Rome demanded lifelong chastity from women who never consented, or that it buried them alive when they failed to uphold a vow they made as children?